Hi everyone, Mark Quinquid here for a brand new episode of our special edition Lore of the Universal Century. Today we are going back again to the Zeta era in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video we are going to explore the history of the Superior Gym, its mechanical lore, variants, and extract every bit of mechanical knowledge we have on them so far. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Nero? Labeled as the MSA-007, the Nero was a general-purpose mass-production mobile suit, deployed by the Earth Federation Space Forces during the early and middle stages of the First Neo-Zeon War. A gym-type machine developed by Anam Electronics during the later stages of the Gryps conflict, the Nero was the indirect result of the economic boom of its parent company and the wartime-caused dinosaur-like evolution of mobile suits of its time, being designed as a highly complex yet high-performance machine, far more refined than any of its contemporary gyms. Indeed, the Nero was a machine directly designed after Anaheim's Zeta Project Gundams, reusing armor parts and design elements from not one but two of these Gundams, the Lambda and Yota Gundams, thus giving it a very unusual silhouette for a gym type, while letting it adopt very unorthodox features such as double chest intakes, giving it excellent cooling performance. This feature notably enabled the Nero to install a larger-than-most generator, with a middle ground output of 1650 kW, so 6% higher than the Gym 3 and 8% lower than the Marasai, leaving however the Nero with the ability to make the most out of those three units due to this superior cooling. This meant that the Nero could easily allocate more energy to the limbs and onboard systems despite a lower output, giving it far better responsiveness, improved thrusters control, and the possibility to equip additional equipment without surpower powering. Thanks to this, the Nero could also notably be modded with various degrees of fine-tuning when it came to its OS, enabling it to be adjusted for the needs of rookie pilots or unlock more functions and manual features for experienced pilots, thus enabling the Nero to be used as the most basic of gym types, or a high-performance ace machine if required with the proper tuning. In addition to that, the Nero was also a machine that reflected Anam Electronics' previous gym type, the Nemo, in many ways, featuring a sensor range that exceeded most contemporary ground suits, but also introduced a special partially exposed movable frame, making the Nero a fully fledged second-generation mobile suit, much like the Nemo. Thanks to this movable frame, the Nero gained additional maneuverability, lightness, and overall agility, a feature which, coupled with the enlarged generator, made the Nero capable of transitioning into a proper multi-purpose model if need be, the Nero exposing its movable frame at the shoulder level to latch optional equipments and power them as if they were included in the base design from the get-go. Weaponry-wise, the Nero was a bit on the conservative side, even if not that badly, mainly relying on a custom beam rifle, equipping a beam smart gun grade precision sensor for accurate sniping, and two regular beam sabers, while also mounting an optional Vulcan pod instead of inbuilt ones, similarly to the Balsam and Gundam Mark II. With all these features, the Nero appeared as an excellent mobile suit, far better than not only all of its contemporary gyms, but also most known 4th generation mass production models, making it one of the best ground models to ever roam the late UC-80s. Yet, as always in these videos, the Nero was not a wonder weapon, far from that. First of all, the Nero, with its high-end design and exceptional performance, was still a grunt machine at the end of the day, being the spawn of what Anam Electronics labeled a high-low concept, with the Nero using technology derived from multiple Gundam types, yes, and far more than any past and contemporary gyms, which was the high, but also being finished with low elements, notably standardized parts, productivity-friendly adjustments, and forced versatility being taken into consideration. This resulted in a very multi-purpose design, yet one that was, at the end of the day, medium in levels of mobile suit performance, making it thus possible to adopt as a mainstay mass production machine, but a far cry from its Gundam parents. Secondly, the Nero, as complex and multi-purpose as it was, also suffered from the era it was thrown in, and notably the transition between the Gryps War, the apex of 2nd and 3rd generation designs, to the First Neo-Zeon War, where the 4th generation ruled uncontested. In this new era, the Nero greatly suffered from its lack of firepower to keep those large, bulky, and armed-to-the-teeth enemies in check, making it easy picking for such terrifying new designs. Finally, the Nero, despite its numerous adjustments, was also quite expensive for what it was sold as, aka a multi-purpose next-generation GIM, which eventually resulted in the Earth Federation briefly adopting it in early UC-88, but almost only in special task forces and prestigious fleets. After the conclusion of the messy First Neozian War and the months of reorganization the Federation had required to start responding to Neozian, the Nero was eventually phased out in favor of the inferior but way cheaper GIM 3, a fate it shared with the Nouvelle GIM 3, with the Nero being not decommissioned per se, but its production being not renewed anymore. Nonetheless, the Nero design would be restudied extensively by Anime Electronics, with the J-Gun being later considered the abstract between Jeda, GIM 3, Balsam, Woundwort, but also Nero, from which it kept its multi-purpose design, Vulcan pod, and great versatility. But that's enough setting for today, let's get to our lore. The year is Universal Century UC-87. At that time, the Federation civil war known as the Gryps conflict was raging, opposing the Titans Task Force organization to the rebel splinter branch known as the EWAC, the Anti-Earth Union Group. During that bloody conflict, the mega corporation Anime Electronics had reached its zenith, acting as the main sponsor and manufacturer of the EWAC and its forces, while also receiving funds and development projects from the Titans, outplaying both sides and growing richer and richer as the death toll of the war skyrocketed. During the war, Anime had notably funded and manufactured a lot of the EWAC's war efforts, ranging from the MSA-005 Nero, its new mainstay GIM-type machine, the Rick Diaz, a middle-performance heavy mobile suit, the infamous Agama-class assault carrier that served as the EWAC flagship and its related Irish-class battleships, and even the MSA-006 Zeta Gundam, the star transformable mobile suit of the EWAC's top ace, Camille Bidan. The Rick Diaz, also known as the Gamma Gundam, and the Zeta were both parts of Anaheim top priority Zeta Project, a special development plan aiming to produce cutting-edge Gundams with increasingly complicated but highly advanced features to reign supreme as area dominance assets. As the Gryps war prolonged and the fight intensified, the EWAC's request for increasingly advanced machines coinciding with the shift from the second and third generation of mobile suits to fourth generation models drastically intensified, incentivizing Anaheim to start related development plans to supply them with tight-turning Gundams. Thus were multiple plans drawn as continuations of the Zeta Project as the year UC-87 came to an end, most notably involving 3 third-generation Gundams that would later be adapted as 4th-generation models. The first of those plans was the infamous Theta plan, a large Gundam whose plans predated the actual Zeta, equipping a biosensor, monstrous firepower, and a combiner-like transformable frame with A, B, and core fighter sections, a concept that would down the line lead to the future EWAC shining star, the Double Zeta Gundam. The second of those plans, the Yota Gundam, which would later give us the S Gundam, instead introduced a fully transformable 4th generation Gundam, still relying on separate A, B, C structural sections, while also experimenting with unmanned piloting technologies, notably introducing the groundbreaking AI, Alice. Finally, the third of those plans, codenamed Lambda, instead worked on a very obscure and mostly unknown other Gundam, designed around a simplified transformable mechanism and meant to be used as a new type-use asset, introducing a psycho control monitor and its own complement of funnels. Now, separately from these 3 plans, Anaheim had also an entire department, still inside the Zeta Project, that was itself involved in the development of next-generation mass production suits, a department which would soon be approached by the common denominator between Titans and EWAC, the base Federation Space Forces themselves. When or how exactly the Nero development project was kickstarted precisely is murky, to be entirely honest, although some sources mention that the Nero was developed for the Federation forces themselves in the first place, rather than being an EWAC or Titans-meant project that the Federation was second-handed. The Nero model number of MSA-007 actually also predates the double Zeta, S Gundam and Lambda Gundam through its serial code, which seems to imply that there was already some preliminary placeholder plan for a gym type meant for the Earth Federation forces right between the Zeta Gundam and the Le Cygne and connected to the Gundam Mark III, all three Gundam types that Anaheim was developing for the EU. The implication here is that the regular Federation forces had tried since the middle of the Gryps War at the latest to secure a contract with Anaheim Electronics to mass produce them a cutting-edge gym type, a weapon to phase out their now obsolete Gym 2s and Galbardi betas, similarly to what they had attempted with the Isaac contract in UC-84 that the Titans had then more or less snatched under their personal jurisdiction, thus leaving the base Federation forces without a successor suit. What is however known is how the Nero was designed, with Anaheim finally taking over the Federation's contract and starting to work on this next generation gym type. To create the Nero, parts and design elements from the Iota and Lambda plans were introduced early on during the development, the future Nero introducing a lower body directly modeled after the S Gundam of the Iota plan, while instead adopting the Lambda Gundam torso and upper body design. Now, more than just reusing Lambda and Iota elements, Anaheim also based the Nero's development on their own precedent gym type, the MSA-005 Nero, whose design doctrine and structural layout greatly modeled the Nero's own conception. Like the Nemo, the future Nero would adopt many elements rarely seen amongst all gym types, such as a high-quality movable frame, a Gundam armor over lesser titanium alloy and ceramic composites, and of course, a design emphasis on equipment swapping and mission adequacy. This development project, which took place in the very later stages of the Gryps War, would only bear its first fruits in the late winter UC-88, with the Nero being rolled out by Anaheim for the Federation Space Forces, right as the Gryps conflict concluded and the First Neo-Zeon War immediately followed. Now, before we continue this video, I propose a pause to clear a misconception and a blatant lie both the Gundam Wiki and MHQ have again introduced in the Western fanbase about the Nero series, starting with a MSA-007X prototype Nero, claiming it to be the partial progenitor of the Nero line. Mind you, this design is something that exists, but the wiki repeats like a parrot that it comes from the Gundam War series, yet blatantly ignores that it doesn't come from the first two entries, Zeta and Mission Double Zeta, but the third one, Gundam Wars 3 Sentinel. That thing is actually one of the two Outlaw draft original design concepts for the Nero trainer, not an in-lore prototype for it, with the writing snippet of that page presenting that as, I quote, "Early draft for the mass-produced Nero, pay attention to the legs, they have a vibe similar to the Yakushiki. This is a more rugged proposal than the eventual final version." Around it you can see other snippets about leg and ankle proportions and similar Outlaw commentaries, alongside the use of MSA-005, the Nemo's model number. At no point is the MSA-007X model number used, nor any of the custom stats the wiki provides, which are all completely made up. Again, that's the early Outlaw draft of the Nero, not a damned prototype Nero in any way. Mind you, that thing can only come from Gundam Wars 3, as the Nero didn't exist before Sentinel and the following entries of Gundam Wars, covering other timelines, G and Wing to be precise. As always, sourceful speculation is one thing, mistakes are another, and blatant misinformation is again another level, which the wiki and MHQ are often guilty of. The idea of the prototype Nero isn't bad per se, nor is the likely model number if that thing existed, but the completely made up stats are definitely the nail in the coffin. But let's go back to the Nero proper deployment history. Once its design was finalized, the Nero was immediately sold to the Earth Federation Space Forces to adopt as a mainstay machine, the new machine being prioritized to elite units across the Federation, such as the infamous and prestigious Earth Orbital Defense Fleet. In terms of production, it is known that a grand total of units were acquired rapidly by the Earth Federation forces in the first months of UC-88, with 80 being sent to the Earth Orbital Fleet and 40 being kept in storage, later given to Task Force Alpha during the Pezun Rebellion, but more on that later. Why exactly the Federation rushed to acquire so many Neros in such a short time span is not exactly clear, although some sources mention that this was catalyzed by the Federation having shot itself in the foot after the 1-year war, having rebuilt its forces with cheap and convenient but poorly aging models such as the Gym 2. This had effectively left the Federation bogged down in the early stages of the Gryps War, with their mainstay forces being unable to withstand the technological boom that surrounded the Zeta era, and that thus forced the Federation and Titan's R&D facilities to try to damage control this by simply going on with trials and errors, producing many super expensive, high-end and overly specialized machines such as the Gafley, Ambra-B, Gaplant and many others. Now that the Gryps War was coming to an end, and despite the First Neo War immediately following, the Federation wanted to at least have a general unit that was modern, adequate, and featured things that reflected the recent technological boom which Anaheim could amply provide through the Nero. Some other sources also mentioned that the Nero was acquired in competition to the own successor of the Gym 2, the Gym 3, and its own costier built from the ground-up version, the Nouvelle Gym 3, with all three models contending in the Federation forces for the duration of the First Neo-Zeon War. The Nero primary path to fame would however come around January UC-88, where the Pezun Instructor Corps, outraged by the Federation's decision to move their support from the Titans to the EWAC, staged a military takeover of the large R&D asteroid fortress, eliminating the recalcitrant elements of the local garrison and seizing the base and its armories for themselves, rebranding themselves as the New Decides in the process. Thus started the so-called Pezun Rebellion, with the Federation top brass convinced that the New Decides would back down if intimidated, assembling an expeditionary punitive unit with dubious seriousness, Task Force Alpha, made of many paper tigers, experimental prototypes, rookie pilots, and various washouts. Despite Task Force Alpha's greeny composition, the unit was nonetheless provided with substantial firepower and mechanical support, being given an Ace Gundam machine, the S Gundam, 5 Gundam-type models, and a total of 40 Neros to build up their standard forces, a privilege that few Federation units would ever get to enjoy. Most of those Neros would fight and be destroyed in the subsequent events of Gundam Sentinel, spearheading Task Force Alpha's efforts to break into Pezun, and later try to counter the fleeing New Decides in the battles around Air City, where the Titan sympathizer took refuge, then later taking part in the final fight over Earth orbit. Now, aside from its mainline form, the MSA-007 would also receive a couple of unique and interesting variations, created by clipping equipment on the Nero's exposed movable frame to expand its tactical usability. The first existing example of this gimmick is the mobile suit known as the MSA-007E EWAC Nero, an upgraded version of the Nero specially redesigned for recon and electronic warfare. A machine specially designed to scout ahead of fleets and gather data to later dispatch back to Central Fleet Command, the EWAC Nero was a machine far outclassing previous EWAC models such as the Recon Zaku, EWAC Zack, or even EWAC Jim, fully ditching the traditional head radar for a more blockish rectangular unit capable of mounting far more equipment. This special hammerhead unit notably mounted multiple antennas for long-range scanning and immediate friend or foe detection, while also packing multiple radomes and a multi-sensor unit capable of passive information gathering, placed on the hammerhead front. Ice on the cake, the EWAC Nero also introduced various additional gimmicks for scouting and spying, such as extensible cable-connected cameras connected to its right arm, as well as 2 RPVs stored in its inner shoulders, aka remotely piloted vehicles that could detach from the EWAC Nero and scout ahead even further. With these features, the EWAC Nero reached a total scanning range of nearly 6,250 kilometers, meaning that a single EWAC Nero would in theory have enough range to scan half the perimeter of the entire lunar surface, which is like fair. It's a high-end electronic warfare specialist. Like most EWAC suits, the EWAC Nero also embarked 4 data pods with self-propelled capabilities, enabling it to send back information to its mothership even outside of laser communication range. Final addition, the EWAC Nero also included additional purgeable boosters, enabling it to extend its cruising range and operational time, a much needed asset for an EWAC suit. Small downside, but the sheer requirements of the EWAC Nero resulted in it becoming a two-seater to be even remotely usable, with the suit cockpit hosting a regular pilot, tasked to control the mobile suits, and an intelligence officer that would instead manage all the sensors, interpret what they picked, and decide what to do with the information. How many EWAC Neros were produced is not entirely known, although it is known at least one was used by Task Force Alpha in the early stages of the Pezun Rebellion, sacrificing itself to scan enough data about Pezun's fortifications and send its data pods to the fleet. Some other sources also state that conversion parts for EWAC Neros were supposed to be delivered by the Eno fleet to Task Force Alpha, but later fell in the hands of the new Decides when Eno defected, much like the Gundam Mark V, which is hilarious to me because the new Decides never had Neros to outfit them with, but at least their enemies didn't get any for theirs. The EWAC Nero would actually have a legacy that would outshine the original Nero, with many future EWAC designs prior to the ST gun, notably the EWAC J-gun, EWAC Jesta, and ESM J-gun, while adopting direct parts or inspired components from their ancestor the EWAC Nero. Yeah, well, either the EWAC Nero design was just that good, or Anime Electronics just didn't want to innovate, your pick. Now we have talked since the beginning that the Nero was capable of becoming different models through grafted equipment on its very own movable frame, a feature we have shown here with the EWAC Nero and will continue with other way more famous variants. In second place meets the MSA-007 a mobile suit known as the Nero Trainer, a machine obtained by grafting so-called trainer parts on the Nero movable frame. These trainer parts were a pair of high-maneuver supplementary binders, each equipped with a thermonuclear rocket engine with two supplementary verniers identical to the ones of the Nero backpack, thus doubling the total amount of thrusters in the trainer design while granting it super maneuverability. Thanks to these movable binders, the Nero Trainer could thus not simply double its forward rear thrust, but also cut by half the required time to rotate on itself by 180 degrees, thus making for an outstanding upgrade. Now, despite its name, the Nero Trainer was not a trainer mobile suit, in the sense it wasn't, unlike the Zaku Trainer, Gym Canard or Gym Trainer, a machine that rookies would use to get accustomed to piloting mobile suits. Instead, the Nero Trainer was what would be referred to as an aggressor mobile suit, a method employed by many militaries worldwide. Basically, when doing live exercises, militaries across the world and even sci-fi tend to use some of their own men as the enemy, the aggressors, and typically outfit them with captured enemy equipment as seen in Stardust Memory, friendly equipment masquerading as enemy equipment, or even more rarely, as friendly units with improved specifications to train pilots to counter models they know, but with better performance. The idea is a bit in the line of know and overestimate your enemy, it is much better than underestimating it. The Nero Trainer actually belonged to the last category of aggressor machines, being used by the training instructor to serve as an enemy for his cadets or trainees to face, for them to learn how to deal and cope with enemies with much better specs than expected. Now, why the Nero Trainer was named as such, despite being anything but a trainer suit, is not exactly clear, although some sources explain that with an actual funny story. Indeed, it is said that the Nero Trainer was actually commissioned as a trainer by the Ministry of Defense as a new suit for the Combat Training Brigade of the Earth Federation forces, but also for Mobile Suit Platoon's commanders, the completed design ending up being way too high performance and exceeding expectations, thus its reassignment as an aggressor high mobility opponent. Ironically enough, the concept stage Outlaw for the Nero Trainer, the Nero Binder equipped, introduced a Kaplan-style set of wing binders with beam cannons and was judged Outlaw as too high-hand by the Sentinel staff, meaning that the two high-hand Nero Trainer in lore had an even too higher-handed Nero concept Outlaw. Production-wise, only one Nero Trainer was known to have been created and was fielded as part of the 40 Neros of Task Force Alpha, meeting its end in what could be labeled as the most dramatic showdown of Gundam Sentinel, but I don't want to spoil everything. Read the novel, it is that good. Now back in the rabbit hole of the concept behind the Nero trainer, that Nero binder-equipped concept was actually used as a selectable suit in the Gundam Sentinel RPG of 1987, meaning that thing kinda exists in universe and it reuses the bodily structure of the concept stage Nero that doesn't exist in universe, and that the wiki and MHQ sold you as the prototype Nero. Again, just because the Nero binder-equipped technically exists in universe through our RPG, doesn't mean that the concept Nero does as well, and that it is a predecessor in any form. Take also into account that the Nero binder-equipped has never made a return in official material since 1987, despite the Gundam fact files covering again the Nero, Nero Trainer and EWAC Nero in details in the mid-2000s, so its existence is even more debatable than hell the Goblin. If the Nero binders equipped ever return, it is going to reuse the regular Nero bodily frame rather than keep the chunkier one from the concept stage. Trust me. Now, to finish this video, it is sad to announce that the Nero eventually fell into disuse as the Universal Century reached its 90s, its production not being renewed, and it, much like the Nouvelle Gym 3, being replaced by the inferior but cheaper Gym 3, and down the line, outclassed by newer animatronics gym types such as the Jeda and later Jagan, all of which at least partially developed with Nero data into account. By the mid-90s, the Nero had seemingly vanished from circulation, and it wouldn't be until UC-169 that a single unit would be seen again, stored in the bowels of Luna 2, now HQ of the Barbarian Kingdom of the country of Im. A EWAC Nero can also be spotted at some point during the events of Crossbone Dust, but again, this one is a replica from the Luna 2 workshop of the country of Im, one of those other workshops that bought the replica parts produced there. Despite this, the Nero left a satisfactory tech legacy for the Jagan line to follow, and thus greatly contributed to the Gym line becoming a versatile line capable of following modern trends, departing it from its early blunders seen with the Gym Kai, Gym 2, and even Gym 3, all rapidly outdated to rigid designs at some point in their life. With this video comes to an end. You're of course welcomed on our Discord, especially if you like Sentinel, Double Zeta or just gyms in general. Mark and Kud out.
But who will survive?